Morning guys, from today onwards we are going to resume the classes and I will be starting the module 5. If you remember correctly, in the last module I have not taken the electroencephalograph. Only one topic is pending, EEG. I will be handling it a little bit later. And today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic called the ventilator. As you can see in the diagram itself, this is a block diagram of the ventilator. This ventilator has two important parts. One is the upside part, this one. I hope you can see this one, the top part, as well as this bottom part. This top part is where the oxygen as well as the air will be mixed, and there will be a storage tank as well. And the bottom part, this one, this controls the rate at which the mixed air, that is the oxygen enriched air, has to be fed to the patients. That is, this particular section exactly controls, it determines the parameters of the flow rate, of the oxygen enriched air that is to be fed to the patient through this, right, through this section, through this pipe, vein pipe. They call it as vein pipe, right? And this section is the place where we store the air, right? We store the air, and we exactly at what rate the oxygen has to be mixed with the air. Those things, those mixing, those storing, everything will be taken care of this particular section. Of late, you might have heard about a ventilator. You might have heard a lot of news related to ventilator as well. What is a ventilator first? Ventilator is a medical device that helps a patient to breathe when he cannot do the breathing on his own. That means ventilator is an artificial breathing device that makes the life of the patient easier. So naturally the question arises, when do the patient may struggle to breathe? It's very easy to point out that the patient may find it really difficult to breathe when there is a complication in the lungs, because lung is the primary respiratory organ. So in case if there is an infection, in case if the lung does not properly function, or else in case if the patient is so feeble so that he can do the breathing on his own, or else in case if the patient is in a coma stage, or else in case if the particular patient is infected, in case if the particular patient is so feeble, maybe like an old person or else a person who met an accident or a trauma, those patients may not breathe properly. But breathing is extremely important phenomenon, because once the patient does not breathe properly, the blood is not going to be oxygenated properly. If the blood is not oxygenated properly, then further complications may arise, and very soon the kidney will have its function very increased, and it can cause even a significant damage to the kidney as well. So as you see, every single part of the body is interlinked, and everything has to co-work accordingly. And in the recent situation where the demand for the ventilator has skyrocketed, you might have started to think, what is the real need for the ventilator in treating the COVID or also coronavirus, right? Look, generally what happens when a particular patient is infected with the coronavirus, that particular virus sneaks inside the nose, enters through the respiratory tract, and enters into the lungs, and because of the infection, the mucus will be formed inside the lungs, and the mucus formation inside the lungs will be overwhelming in such a way that it will affect the normal breathing pattern of the patient. And also I told you about the functioning of the lungs in my classroom itself, that there are so many tiny alveoli, we call it as alveoli or air sacs inside the lungs, that makes the transfer or transfusion or diffusion of the oxygen from the lung side to the blood possible, right? And once the coronavirus starts to develop a lot of mucus inside the lungs, this particular air sacs will be damaged, and thereby the patients will be finding it extremely difficult for breathing. As the days goes on, the patient may develop something called ARDS. In expansion form, we call it as acute respiratory distress syndrome. When this happens, the patient goes for rapid breathing, and the heart rate gets very increased, and this will certainly damage the tissues of the alveoli. So after over a period of time, it may be very impossible, it may be very hard for the patients to breathe, or else it is simply impossible. So in certain cases, it may be impossible for the patients to breathe as well. As you can see in this block diagram, let me point it out. This windpipe will be inserted into the mouthpiece, or in certain cases it will be inserted in this tunnel. We have the respiratory tract, right? So in certain cases they used to implant inside the tract itself, inside the respiratory tract itself. So how this ventilator will work? Look, the ventilator should not force the patient to breathe. The ventilator should coordinate the patient for breathing purpose. It should not be like the overwhelming the pressure, or else the airflow injected into the body of the patient should not overpower him, right? So for that, we need to take some measurements from the patient itself in order to have a controlled breathing, in order to provide a smooth airflow inside the patient. We should take care of some of the parameters. We should measure some of the parameters from the patient, and those parameters have been listed over here. For example, the proper respiration rate of the guy, as well as the tidal volume of the particular patient. These things have to be measured in prior with the injection of the oxygen. And one critical parameter which has to be measured is this one, the PEEP value. The PEEP value is nothing but positive end expiratory pressure in the lungs above the atmospheric pressure that exists at the end of the expiration. That is, at the end of the expiration, what is the amount of the expiratory pressure inside the lungs that is above the atmospheric pressure, right? This is a very critical parameter, and these informations will be collecting, and those informations will play a huge role in taking part of this microprocessor based controller, right? Here we have the storage option. I think the storage tank the reservoir tank's capacity is something like around 8 liters actually. It's a general standard 8 liters, and this microprocessor part controls the amount of the airflow through this windpipe, so that the patient can breathe easily or freely, even without his knowledge also. That air pipe will blow gently the air inside the lungs, so that it will reach the alveoli, it will reach the air sacs, so that the oxygenation of the blood will be possible, which is not possible otherwise, right? So these are the things that I was talking about in my previous slide. Look at this. There are two chambers, pneumatic chamber as well as electronic control chamber. The first chamber determines what is the ratio of the oxygen that has to be mixed with the air, and that should be of the medical standards, and the oxygen enriched air should be stored in a separate tank that has been mentioned here, right? And the control part starts here, and as I told earlier, the microprocessor will determine these important parameters in prior to the injection of the oxygen through the respiratory tract, and these are extremely important parameters that determine the respiration rate, that determines the flow rate of the oxygen enriched air inside the patient's body through respiratory tract. And this is also an extremely important critical parameter, and they may ask this, the definition of this value, PEEP value, the university exam, right? And today I am going to give you a homework. You have to text me through WhatsApp in the group itself, biomedical group itself, what are the normal standard values of this respiration rate, flow waveform, tidal volume, oxygen concentration and PEEP. What are the normal values, medical standards of these values that has to be texted, right? Every single student has to identify on their own and they have to text, right? This is one question, and based on this only I will be giving the attendance information. Based on the submission of the assignments, small homeworks, based on that only I can determine whether the particular person is attending this class effectively or not. And as you see, there is a pressure sensor that has been connected at the wind tunnel. I told you, some wind piece, some kind of tunnel will be inserted into the mouth actually, or the vocal tract, this one. So at the end of the particular tube, a pressure sensor will be connected that determines the exact amount of the pressure that has been inserted on the windpipe because of the flow of the air. In the previous slide I was talking about some physical parameters that has to be mentioned, and here we have seen the standard values. The respiration rate should be greater than 35 or should be lesser than 5 breaths per minute. These are the normal values actually. So and hypoxia, some important parameters I have listed here. And this one, so vital capacity, or we call it as tidal volume. If the particular patient is abnormally breathing, these parameters are going to change for sure. If the particular patient is touching a critical level, then this ventilator will easen his life, or that easify his life. If the particular patient is struggling to breathe, if the particular patient could not be able to provide these parameters, standard parameters, then immediately, as soon as possible, the doctors will be putting them into the ventilator so that the breathing will be done properly. We have studied the proper functioning of the heart as well as the lung, and how critical these two entities are going to play a role in maintaining the body temperature as well as the proper functioning of all the cells, even the metabolism act also, right? And also one more important thing is this heart lung, this combination also provides us a body regulation. I mean, it provides us a way for maintaining the temperature. This is what I meant, right? And these things we have already seen. If you can recall it correctly, heart just acts as a pump. It is divided into right as well as the left portion, and the right portion receives blood, impure blood, right, impure blood from all over the body, and pumps the same to the lungs. And in the lungs the purification process happens, because we inhale the air, it enters into the lungs through the alveoli, that is the air sacs. Because of the diffusion process, the oxygenated blood, the oxygen which we have inhaled will diffuse through the alveoli sacs and enter into the blood, and the deoxygenation process will happen, and the carbon dioxide will be exited or exhaled out. These things we have already discussed in the class. And also you should keep it in mind, the impure blood enters the heart from two large veins called superior as well as inferior vena cava. You can go through the class notes. These things we have already discussed there. The heart and lungs work together to keep the body's cells supplied with oxygen. During circulation, the heart pumps oxygen depleted blood to the lungs and then receives the oxygenated blood from the lungs for the distribution for the rest of the body. This is the primary important thing that we have discussed in the class. But often, many a time, the heart can become damaged from heart disease or trauma, any trauma. So they may need some open heart surgery where the chest is open and the heart is exposed for some time, right? And because that needs some, the damage needs to be fixed. So during that open heart surgery procedure, it may be necessary to stop the heart in order to repair the heart's muscle, valves or other structures, right? You might have heard these stories from your parents or else from some of your neighbors too, whom they have undergone some bypass surgery or open heart surgery, right? So the main problem is we cannot allow the heart as well as the lung to function function normally when the doctor is performing the open heart surgery, because one small accident, say for example my blade, the doctor's blade accidentally hits a vein or artery, then the entire blood will gush into the heart chamber and it will engulf the entire area, and the visibility will be extremely poor, and it will make the it will make the doctors to perform the surgery extremely complicated. It makes the entire scenario extremely complicated, in short, right? So that puts the patient under risk. So in order to avoid that, we have to find some other mechanism that will allow the heart and lung to stay idle for some time during this actual surgery is being performed. So that particular machine, we call it as heart lung machine. This allows the surgeon or also the doctor to carefully stop the heart while still maintaining the blood circulation. That is, like, he can the body can function with a proper oxygenate, with a proper pumping as well as a proper oxygenated blood being received all over the body. At the same time, the surgeon or else the doctor can perform an operation as well, right? So this machine consists of a pump which functions as the heart, and the lungs acts as a oxygenator. And of course we have to maintain the temperature as well, because temperature of the blood is also being maintained. So that also has to be performed during the in the heart lung machine. So three important things in the heart lung machine. One is we should need a chamber which will pump the blood all over the body, and then we should need a section which will perform the oxygenation process, and third thing is we have to maintain the body temperature by regulating the temperature of the blood. So during a heart lung bypass, oxygen poor blood is first diverted from the upper chamber of the heart, right? It is being diverted from the upper chamber of the heart and is being directed to a reservoir called the heart lung machine. The heart lung machine has a reservoir, so the blood from the upper section of the heart will be diverted and it will be entering into the reservoir. And the heart lung machine, as I told you earlier, has a reservoir, right? The blood is then transferred from the reservoir to the oxygenator. This is the second section which I was talking about, oxygenator. In oxygenator, the blood will be infused with fresh amount of oxygen with a known amount of percentage, that is as per the medical standards. Next, we need a pump, and the pump's mechanism will return the blood to the patient's arterial system, where the body can resume blood circulation on its own. So this is that. So this is how the heart lung machine performs during the bypass surgery. So this slide explains the purpose of the heart lung machine that we have already discussed in the previous slide. You can go through it. The heart lung machine provides the benefit of a motionless heart during open heart surgery. The heart lung machine is valuable during this time since the patient is unable to maintain blood flow to the lungs or body. And one more third important purpose also I have told you. And if you want, you can rewind and check it out. So this is the block diagram which I was talking about, and as you see, it has a blood reservoir as well as a cannula. I will explain that what it is. Right atrium cannula, and we have a filter just to ensure that to avoid any foreign bodies to enter into the bloodstream, and we have a femoral artery cannula. These things I will explain, and we have an oxygenator, and we have a heat exchanger, and we have a pump as well as we have a blood reservoir. So these are the main components of the heart lung machine. Look, heart lung machine is a repeatedly asked question in university. They may ask you for 6 marks or 8 marks depending upon the KTU pattern, right? So it is wiser for you to study this particular question in detail. And this particular slide tells you the components of the heart lung machine. One is the cardioplegia, cannula, blood reservoirs, heparin pump, roller pumps or centrifugal pump, oxygenator, and heat exchanger. These things we are going to study one by one in the next slides. So cardioplegia is an intentional activity that will be performed during the performed during the open heart surgery. It is generally used to protect the myocardium during the open heart surgery, and this can be done by infusing a solution to the heart so that it will prevent the heart from stopping. Even though we are not using the real heart for a moment, still the heart will function, right? So this particular solution will be infused into the heart by a separate special circuit, and this will ensure, this cardioplegia will ensure that the heart will function properly even during the open heart surgery time. So in short, I can say it as this particular solution has been infused into the heart to avoid stopping of the heart, or else it will ensure it will prevent the death of the heart tissue. This is how it is. We call it as cannula. The next section is cannula. Cannula is nothing but a thin tube. Already we have studied this catheter and all, right? We have discussed in the class. This is a similar kind of tube actually. A thin tube inserted into a vein or body cavity so that we can administrate any medicine through it to the vein, or else we can use it for draining any liquid from the body, or else we can use it for injecting any kind of medications through the veins. So here the cannula, this we call it as venous cannula. This has been used typically for removing the oxygen deprived blood from the patient's body. An arterial cannula is also there, that will be sewn to the patient's body, and this will be used for infusing the oxygen rich blood. So as we can see, as we have seen in the previous slide, a cardioplegia cannula will also be sewn into the heart. What is the purpose of that? That we have just discussed. We will infuse a solution, cardioplegia solution, to maintain the heartbeat, or else to avoid the heart myocardial infarction. Will be infusing the solution. And this particular cannula we call it as cardioplegia cannula. They can ask you for short questions, these things actually. So please memorize these definitions. As I have mentioned in the block diagram, the next thing which you are going to see is the blood reservoir. The blood reservoir, the main purpose is to facilitate a return flow of the blood, venous blood, and it facilitates for the removal of the bubble trap as well. That while the blood enters into the reservoir, there is a chance for formation of the foam kind of bubbles and all, small bubbles. That will be extremely dangerous for the patient. So that will be removed in the blood reservoir, and this is a place where we can conveniently add some drugs or even some fluids, or even we can add some fresh blood. So something like that can be done in the blood reservoir, and the blood reservoir can be either plastic type or else even hard type, or else even plastic bags can also be used, but we have to make sure that it is not being contaminated by a foreign body or something like that. So we have to be very careful to ensure the cleanliness there. When we take the blood from the body and we save it in the storage tank or also the reservoir bag, there is a fair amount of chance that this particular blood may be actually coagulated. So that is again a very dangerous thing to happen, because the blood clots when returned back to the bloodstream, that can be a blockage through the veins, and that will be a huge hindrance for the blood to flow through the valves. So this particular clots should be avoided at any cost, and heparin pump does exactly the same thing. So here this heparin should be given to the patient in order to reduce the blood's ability to clot. So here they inject some kind of anticoagulants, powerful anticoagulants, so that that will ensure the blood to be blood from clotting, right? So this section maintains or regulates the body temperature. It does it by either passing the blood through a heating circuit or as a cooling circuit. In the heat exchanger, generally the blood flows through a spiraling coils, and the coil is made up of stainless steel, or also in some case they make it as a copper, but the stainless steels are preferred over copper. And the inner walls of the coil are recoated with polymers to limit the blood surface interactions, and the electrolyte interaction which we have discussed in the class. You have to keep it in mind. The half cell potential, these things we have already discussed. So we have to prefer a material in such a way that it will limit, or else it will produce only very low amount of electrolyte interaction. So stainless steel is one such material, that's why they are preferring that. And so the blood is being circulated in the spiral coil, and the circulating water is chilled to near 0 degree centigrade in an ice bath and heated by an electrical resistance coil to an absolute maximum of 42 degree centigrade. So this is how they maintain the body temperature, and this is a very essential step in order to maintain the body temperature. What happens when the body temperature has not been regulated properly, that we have discussed in the class itself. I hope you remember about the condition called isothermia, all those things and all. If you can't recollect it, please go through the notes which I have discussed in the class. So oxygenators is a critical area where the oxygen of the blood will be infused, and there are 3 types of the oxygenator. It is not being mentioned in the syllabus, but still we can look into the names. Actually, 3 important types of oxygenator are membrane oxygenators, bubble oxygenator, and film oxygenator. So even before introducing the dialyzer, I would like to introduce a few glimpses which I have already discussed in the class. That's about the kidneys. The kidneys are 2 bean-shaped organs in the renal system. What's the purpose of it? The main function of the kidney is to help the body to pass waste through urine, right? So they also help filter blood before sending it back to the heart, right? So mainly the kidneys perform following functions. If you want, you can take notes, or else you can refer the previous class notes as I told earlier. It is helpful for maintaining the overall fluid balance, right? And also it regulates and filters the minerals from the blood, filtering waste materials from food, medications, and toxic substances. Like whatever the food we are taking, mostly nowadays the food are being contaminated, right? Like the pesticides, etc. So these things will be going through the kidney, and the kidney will perform the final stage of the filtering, right? So and the excreta, the waste and all, it will be excreted using the urine. So for some patients, the performance of the kidney may deteriorate over the age, over the years, or also sometimes maybe because of some accident, the performance of the function may downgrade, or else in some cases they may be having some disorder or disease which in turn will affect the functioning of the kidney. So in short, if the kidney does not perform properly, then what happens is something extremely dangerous that will happen. Over the period of time, if the kidney is not functioning properly, the waste will be accumulated in the body, and that will be an extremely tricky condition, and even the patients may eventually face death also. So if this is the situation, we have to introduce a system that will be a replacement for the kidney, and which I am talking about is this topic, today's topic. We call it as artificial kidney or else a dialyzer. In exam they may ask you as this, right? So they may ask you like how an artificial kidney may work, or else they will straight away ask you what's the functioning of the dialyzer, and this is a very important question as well. So in the picture you can see a patient who is undergoing the dialysis process. As I mentioned earlier, it's a medical procedure to remove the fluid and waste from the body, from the blood, and it maintains this electrolyte imbalance. Kidney's main function, right? The same kidney's function this will perform. So in short, I can call it as an artificial kidney as well. The patients with the following procedure, that is acidosis pH lesser than 7.1. So this means the blood's imbalance, right? So pH value should be properly maintained. If it is less, the pH value of the blood, if it is lesser than 7.1, or else if there is an electrolyte imbalance, if the GFR is lesser than 10 ml per minute, and if there are overflow of the fluids, so these are the conditions, these are the indications which generally the doctors rely on for going for a dialysis. I have one more block diagram in my next slide. there I will be explaining the functioning. Here you can have a practical setup of any dialyzing machine. You can see a saline solution. The purpose of saline solution, I leave it to you for assignment, and this is assignment question 1, right? What is the purpose of the saline solution? I have discussed in the class, so just go through it. And there is a fresh dialysate which we mix it through the actually impure blood, and there is a heparin pump. The purpose of the heparin pump I have discussed in the previous slides. If you want, you can go through our previous video, right? And the dialysing machine is there, and as you see, the air bubbles should not be allowed to enter into the body stream. So air trap should be there, air detector or air bubble trap should be there, and that should avoid any eventualities, right? So in the next slide we will be showing you the block diagram where I will be explaining the working. If you compare both the slides, I mean both the diagrams, you will get the complete picture of the working of the dialysis. There will be 2 tubes that are connected to the hemodialysis section, and blood flows from our body to the machine through one of the tubes. That we have to understand. And one more thing is, a doctor generally suggests us to add a kind of blood thinning liquid. This prevents the blood from clotting when it enters to the machine, and this is very important thing, because the blood clot, once it enters back to the body, actually that will play a very dangerous role, and eventually it can have a heart block as well. And there will be a pressure monitor, and the pressure monitor's job is to maintain, I mean to just check the exact pressure of the blood of flow. And there are several types of the blood pressure monitor, and we have already discussed the regular class itself. And this blood pressure monitor works along with a pump, and it works I mean it just coordinates each other to keep the blood flow at the correct rate. It should not be too high, or else it should not be too low. And if you watch it out carefully, the blood enters into the dialyzer where it will be filtered. And inside the dialyzer we have a solution called this dialysate solution. In exam they may ask you for short questions. So this dialysate solution enters into the dialyzer, and it draws the waste out of the blood. Naturally, the working of the dialysate solution is to draw means to pull out the waste of your blood. Once the purpose of the dialysate solution is over, that means after one cycle the dialysate solution should be pumped out. Same dialysate solution will not be used again and again for purification purpose, because the efficiency of the dialysate solution will be lost in the first cycle itself. And as I pointed on the previous slide, the blood then goes through a chamber called air trap chamber, because air traps or else air bubbles, when it enters into the bloodstream, that can cause havoc, that can cause even heart attack as well. So that should be removed very carefully, and that particular chamber, air trap chamber, will do the same. So once after the cleaning process is over, the blood will be pumped back to the body. So naturally one question will arise, what exactly is happening inside the dialyzer? What exactly is happening there? The core of the dialyzer is made up of thousands of tiny mesh tubes, just like in our kidney. It is made up of thousands of tiny mesh tubes, and the blood flows inside each tube, and the dialysate stays on the outside of the tube. It's not in the blood enters through the tiny mesh of the tube, and the dialysate stays outside of the tube. This tiny pores in the tube let the waste and excess fluids pass from your blood into the dialysate. I will repeat that one more time. There are tiny pores in the tubes, and when the blood flows through the tubes, these tiny pores in the tubes will allow the waste and excess fluids pass from your blood into the dialysate. Thereby, when the excess fluid or else the waste enters into the dialysate will absorb it, and it will be removed, and the purified blood will be returning back to the body itself. I hope it is very clear. Even what I have explained so far is the advanced method of the hemodialysis technique, and this block diagram, which is rightly shown in this slide, is a very basic as well as very old generalized block diagram of the hemodialysis, but working wise same. But nowadays the hemodialysis have been advanced. I mean, that particular area have been advanced very much, and the advanced hemodialysis I have explained so far. And this particular block diagram which I have shown on the slide is a very basic as well as very generalized thing. Here you can see there are two mixing chamber. I mean, there is a mixing chamber where the appropriate amount of the water as well as the dialysate will be mixed, and this is pumped inside the dialysate chamber, and inside the dialysate chamber there will be a dialysing solution that is being separated from the blood through a small semi-permeable membrane, and in the blood chamber the impure blood which has to be purified will be collected from the venous cava, through the venous cava, right, through some tubes, right, and because of the diffusion process that happens between the two chambers, the blood will be purified and eventually it will be pumped to the artery section. That's it, guys. What is a kidney stone that you might have already heard? Kidney stones generally they form by building up of dissolved materials on the inner lining of the kidneys. They usually consist of a calcium oxalate but may be composed of several other compounds as well, and it generally has various dimensions, and generally sometimes it can grow up to a golf ball size, and it can cause immense amount of the pain. Even the smallest size of the stone may also cause immense amount of the pain, and sometimes it can go unnoticed. So today we are going to study two types of lithotripsy technique that can be useful for removal of the kidney stones. This technique, which is being shown in the slide, that is called this percutaneous lithotripsy technique, is an invasive technique. Here we will be having a probe which is being guided by X-ray fluoroscopy, and we will be making a small incision, a small hole that is near to the kidney stone formation, and we will be placing a small catheter kind of thing and reach near to the location of the kidney stone. Keep it in mind, the location of the kidney stone has to be found out by using X-ray fluoroscopy. So this approach is called this guided technique, right? And once the tube which we have inserted reaches near to the kidney stone, we will be passing shock waves using ultrasonic crystals. These ultrasonic crystals will be placed at the tip of the catheter or else the tube, and the passed controlled electric discharge will break up the stone into small pieces, and these small pieces can be withdrawn by using a probe. So this is the pictorial representation of the percutaneous lithotripsy technique, and it is very clearly understandable that it's an invasive technique, and the exact location of the stone or else the information of the location of the stone will be received from a X-ray fluoroscopy technique. So totally two techniques we use for this kind of treatment. One is the lithotripsy technique, and next one, the lithotripsy technique will be guided by a X-ray technique. This is the second type of the lithotripsy technique, and as you see, we call it as extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy technique, and this particular procedure is a non-invasive method. That means no need for incision or no need for insertion of any catheter or any ultrasonic crystals or any sucking pump or something like that. Here, after knowing the exact location of the kidney stone, we used to pass multiple number of shock waves, and these shock waves are generated by this multiple discharge, and that will range up to 2000 shock waves, and this particular shock waves will be passed at the direction of the kidney stone, and the kidney stones will be broken to small pieces, and eventually these small pieces can be flushed out through the urinary tract as urine. So for locating the, again just like in the previous technique, just for locating the position of the kidney stone, some other X-ray attenders will be there, and they will be monitoring that in a screen, and they will be exactly pinpointing what location the kidney stone is being presented, and that will give us the information where to pass the multiple shock waves. So this is the pictorial representation of the extracorporeal lithotripsy technique. As I have already said, there will be an attender who will be passing the X-rays uh, through the kidneys, and he can exactly pinpointedly tell where the stone is being located, and he will be just looking at the stone in the monitor, and he is the guy who will be giving this particular critical information, and using this information we will be passing 2000 this multiple shock discharge waves just to pass through the kidney exactly at the point where the stone is being placed. And because of this multiple discharge or shock waves, the stones will be a big stone. For example, a big stone will be broken into small pieces because of the ultrasonic shocks, and these small particles will be now able to, it will have now the capability to travel through the urinary tract. Otherwise it is not possible, because as I said earlier, the stone formation, or else the stone will be formed and the size of the stone will be something bigger than the tubes. So that is the reason it cannot go outside, and it will cause immense pain. The premature babies which are born less than 37 completed weeks may not be physically strong, may not be physically developed, and they may be sometimes find it really difficult to adjust with the outside environment. For example, they can't control their body temperature and often have excessive weight loss, and sometimes it can lead to unstable vital signs as well. Sometimes the lungs of the newborn babies may not be strong enough to maintain the proper breathing, or sometimes the newborn babies might have picked some infection from the new environment. All these are the reasons for putting the newborn baby in the incubator. So an incubator is nothing but an apparatus, or else this apparatus contains a chamber that will be used to provide controlled environmental conditions, especially for the sick babies or premature babies. As you see from the diagram, it has a temperature monitor. That means what? We are going to control the temperature of the particular chamber that is there, and this temperature will be actually controlled by using a overhead warmer, and this overhead warmer is made up of bilirubin lights, and this light will be providing the necessary temperature. And there will be a ventilator. That means what? The ventilator will be useful for maintaining the proper breathing of the small baby. And since we are dealing with the premature babies, most probably he may have an ailment in the heart, so we need to check the heart functioning as well as the blood pressure also should be checked. So we have a ECG as well as blood pressure monitor, and the incubator should also have a feeding system, and the oxygen saturation of the blood of the particular kid should also be checked frequently. So all the essential things that will ensure the proper functioning of the newborn baby will be provided. So this biomedical device will provide the needed warmness, and also it maintains the humidity, and also it provides a controlled air with the proper amount of the oxygen inside the particular chamber. And as I mentioned earlier, the temperature should also be regulated. But the problem is, sometimes the temperature may be high, or sometimes the temperature will be low. So the newborn babies may not find it very easy to adjust with the conditions, and hence the temperature inside the chamber should also be maintained. This temperature should be controlled by using a special control system that uses a thermistor in the bridge circuit. This bridge circuit will have a known point resistance or set point resistance as another arm of the bridge. The working of the bridge you might have studied. Now the bridge output is amplified and will be given as the voltage at the output, which is proportional to the difference in the temperature between the thermistor as well as the known point as well as the set point. This I have mentioned earlier. If the infant is cool, then the set point or else the air entering the chamber of the incubator should be heated at an amount that is proportional to the difference between the temperature which we have set and the baby's actual temperature. Sometimes, in case if the temperature goes beyond a threshold value, and that can cause immense problem to the small baby which has been placed inside, and it can be dangerous. So we will be having an alarm system as well, just to monitor the overheating of the device. If the infant is cooler than the set point, then the air entering the chamber of the incubator is heated, as I mentioned earlier. So today I will be giving you two assignments for counting it as an as attendance. Two questions. What is the purpose of ventilator to be used in the incubator? This is question number 1. I will repeat that. What is the purpose of the ventilator being used inside the incubator? Second question. What is the maximum dimension? What is the maximum dimension ever recorded in the medical history of a kidney stone? Please check out Google. Check out this particular thing. What is the maximum size of a kidney stone that has been identified in the medical history? Thank you guys.